Imagine a world where kings fight each other, peasants starve, and every village lives in fear. Now imagine a single speech that sparks a journey across continents. Thousands of men, women, and even children leaving everything behind to march toward a city they have only heard of in stories. Jerusalem, the holy city, becomes the destination of hope, faith, and ambition. But this journey will test their courage, break their bonds, and change the course of history forever. This is the story of the First Crusade. Imagine a time when Europe was full of fear, hunger, and uncertainty. In 1095, a single speech by Pope Urban II sparked a movement that would change history forever. In this video, you will follow the First Crusade's first journey, how thousands of ordinary people, inspired by faith, left everything behind in what became known as the People's Crusade, and how powerful princes and trained knights prepared for war. You'll witness their march across harsh lands, the first battles at Nicaea, the desperate siege of Antioch, and the moment they finally approached the holy city of Jerusalem. Every step shows courage, struggle, and human cost, exactly as it happened. Timestamps are provided in the description, so if one part doesn't capture your interest, you can jump directly to another. Get ready with a cup of coffee, because we are going back to the time of the Crusades. Part 1. The world before the First Crusade. Before the First Crusade began, Europe was a violent and uncertain place. Life was hard for ordinary people, and most families lived on small farms where they worked from sunrise to sunset. There were no strong nations like we see today. Instead, Europe was divided into many small lands, each controlled by a local lord. These lords often fought each other for land, power, and pride. War was not rare. It was part of everyday life. Knights were trained for battle from a young age. They learned how to fight with swords and shields, but many of them had no real purpose. With no large wars to fight, they often turned their weapons on nearby villages or rival lords. This constant fighting worried the church, because Christians were killing other Christians. The church wanted peace, but it also knew that it could not simply stop the violence by giving orders. At this time, the church was the most powerful institution in Europe. People believed deeply in heaven and hell, and they feared what would happen to their souls after death. They trusted the church to guide them and believed that the Pope spoke with God's authority. One of the strongest ideas taught by the church was that suffering on earth could wash away sins. If a person endured pain and hardship for God, they believed they could be forgiven and saved. Far to the east was the city of Jerusalem. For Christians, Jerusalem was the place where Jesus had lived and died. Very few Europeans had ever seen it, but many dreamed of visiting it. The journey was long and dangerous, and only rich or very determined people could make the trip. Over time, stories about Jerusalem reached Europe. Some travelers said that Christian pilgrims were being treated badly and that holy places were no longer safe. Whether all these stories were true or not, they created fear and anger among ordinary people. Around the same time, a powerful Christian state in the east, called the Byzantine Empire, was facing serious danger. Its emperor, Alexios I, was losing land to Turkish armies that were skilled and fast-moving. The empire could not defend itself alone. Emperor Alexios decided to ask for help from the Christian world in the West. He sent a message to the Pope in Rome, asking for trained soldiers to help protect his lands. The Pope at that time was Urban II. He was not only a religious leader, but also a careful thinker and a strong politician. When Urban II received the emperor's request, he saw an opportunity. By helping the Byzantine Empire, he could strengthen the Church's influence. By calling for a holy war, he could unite fighting knights under one purpose and move their violence away from Europe. And by speaking about Jerusalem, he could touch the deepest emotions of the people. In the year 1095, Pope Urban II called a great meeting in the town of Clermont in France. Leaders of the church, nobles, and ordinary people gathered to hear him speak. Urban II talked about the suffering of Christians in the East and the importance of Jerusalem. He described the journey as difficult but holy. Then he made a powerful promise. Anyone who took part in this mission, he said, would receive forgiveness for their sins. The crowd reacted with excitement and emotion. Many believed that God himself was calling them to fight. They shouted, "God wills it," and the idea of a holy war spread quickly across Europe. But this moment was more than a speech. It was the beginning of a mass movement. The call was not limited to knights and soldiers. Farmers, poor laborers, women, and even children believed they had a role to play. They sold their belongings, left their homes, and prepared to travel thousands of miles to a land they had never seen. Most of these people had no military training and no real understanding of the dangers ahead. They believed faith alone would protect them. As thousands began to move eastward, Europe watched something new and frightening take shape. This was not an organized army yet. It was a wave of belief, hope, and fear moving toward the unknown. This was how the First Crusade began. Part 3. The People's Crusade. Faith without preparation. The People's Crusade began before any king or noble was ready for war. It was not planned by generals, and it was not controlled by the church. It grew from belief, fear, and confusion. Thousands of ordinary people believed that God had called them personally to go to Jerusalem, and they decided not to wait. The most famous leader of this movement was Peter the Hermit. He was a preacher, not a soldier. He wore simple clothes and spoke with great emotion. Wherever he went, crowds gathered. He talked about Jerusalem as a holy place that must be saved. He spoke about suffering as a path to forgiveness. Many people believed his words came directly from God. The people who followed Peter were not knights. Most were poor farmers, laborers, women, and children. They had little food, little money, and no experience of long journeys. Some carried sticks instead of weapons. Many believed that miracles would protect them. They did not think carefully about hunger, illness, or enemies. As these groups moved through Europe in 1096, problems began almost immediately. Food ran out quickly. When towns could not provide enough supplies, some crusaders began to steal. In several places, violence broke out. Jewish communities in parts of Germany were attacked and killed by groups of crusaders. These attacks were not ordered by the Pope, but they happened because of hatred, fear, and lack of control. This showed how dangerous the movement had already become. When the People's Crusade reached the Byzantine Empire, Emperor Alexios was shocked. He had asked for trained soldiers, not crowds of unarmed civilians. He feared they would cause trouble inside his lands. To protect his empire, Alexios quickly helped them cross into Asia Minor. He wanted them gone as soon as possible. Once in Turkish-controlled territory, the situation became worse. The people did not understand the land or the enemy. They marched without proper scouts or plans. Turkish forces watched them from a distance and waited. When the time was right, they attacked. Near a place called Civitate, the People's Crusade was surrounded. The Crusaders were hungry, tired, and unprepared. The battle was short and brutal. Thousands were killed. Very few escaped. Peter the Hermit was not there at the time. He had returned to Constantinople earlier, possibly to ask for supplies. Most of his followers were left behind. The People's Crusade ended almost as quickly as it began. What remained was silence, death, and broken faith. This disaster showed a hard truth. Belief alone was not enough. Faith without planning led people to destruction. When news of this defeat reached Europe, many were shocked, but the crusade did not stop. The real armies were still coming. Part 4. The Princes Prepare for War. An army with faith, ambition, and doubt. While the People's Crusade was ending in disaster, a very different force was taking shape in Europe. This time, the leaders were not preachers or farmers. They were powerful nobles, trained knights, and experienced warriors. History would later call their campaign the Princes Crusade. These leaders did not fully trust one another. Each prince had his own lands, his own soldiers, and his own goals. Some were deeply religious. Others were driven by ambition, land, or fame. But they all agreed on one thing: this journey to the east could change their lives forever. One of the most respected leaders was Godfrey of Bouillon. He was known as a serious and disciplined man, not famous for clever words, but for strong leadership. He sold much of his land to pay for the journey. This showed that he was committed, but it also showed how costly the crusade already was. Another important leader was Bohemond of Taranto, a Norman warrior from southern Italy. Bohemond was tall, confident, and experienced in war. Unlike some others, he clearly understood politics and strategy. Many believed that Bohemond was less interested in religion and more interested in gaining power in the east. Raymond of Toulouse was one of the oldest and richest leaders. He had fought in many wars and was deeply religious. He wanted to be seen as a true servant of God, but he also wanted respect and influence. Like the others, he did not want to be commanded by another prince. By late 1096, these armies began moving eastward, each traveling separately with its own soldiers. Together, they formed a large and powerful force, but they were not united under one leader. This lack of unity would cause problems later. When the princes reached Constantinople, Emperor Alexios was welcomed carefully. He remembered what had happened with the People's Crusade and did not want more chaos. Alexios asked the princes to swear an oath. They promised that any land taken from the enemy would be returned to the Byzantine Empire. Some princes agreed willingly. Others were uncomfortable, but they accepted the oath because they needed the emperor's support. This moment created tension. The Crusaders needed Byzantine ships, supplies, and guidance, but they also feared losing control over their future conquests. Once the oaths were taken, the armies crossed into Asia Minor. This time, the Crusaders were better prepared. They had armor, weapons, and experienced leaders. But the land ahead was harsh, the roads were long, food was limited, and the enemy was skilled and patient. The crusade was no longer a chaotic movement of belief. It had become a military expedition. But it was still fragile. Trust between leaders was weak, and the balance between faith and ambition was already beginning to strain. The real test was about to begin. Ahead of them stood their first major target, the city of Nicaea. Part 5. The Road to Nicaea and the First Real Victory. After crossing into Asia Minor in early 1097, the Crusader armies entered unfamiliar and difficult land. This region was controlled by the Seljuk Turks, who knew the terrain well and used fast cavalry to their advantage. The Crusaders were heavily armed, but slow. From the very beginning, the journey tested their strength, discipline, and unity. Their first major target was the city of Nicaea. This city was important because it served as a strong base for the Seljuk ruler Kilij Arslan. Earlier, Kilij Arslan had easily defeated the People's Crusade and did not expect a serious threat this time. That assumption would prove to be a mistake.
The Crusader leaders surrounded Nicaea and began a siege. This was the first time the princes had to work together in battle. Coordination was difficult. Supplies were limited, and the heat was intense. Still, the Crusaders held their positions and prevented the city from receiving help. Emperor Alexios supported the siege quietly. He sent ships across a nearby lake to cut off Nicaea's final supply routes. The city slowly weakened. Instead of allowing the Crusaders to storm the city, Alexios negotiated its surrender in June 1097. Byzantine forces took control of Nicaea without allowing the Crusaders to loot it. This decision angered many Crusaders. They had expected rewards after months of hardship. Instead, they felt cheated. This moment deepened the mistrust between the Crusaders and the Byzantine Empire. Even though Nicaea was a success, it revealed how fragile the alliance truly was. After Nicaea, the Crusader army moved deeper into Asia Minor. The land became dry and harsh. Water was scarce. Horses died from thirst and exhaustion. Soldiers suffered from hunger and disease. Turkish forces avoided direct battles and attacked from a distance, weakening the Crusaders slowly. In July 1097, near a place called Dorylaeum, the Turks finally launched a major attack. They surprised one group of Crusaders and nearly destroyed it. For several hours the situation was desperate, but reinforcements arrived in time. The Crusaders regrouped and pushed the Turkish forces back. The Battle of Dorylaeum was important. It showed that the Crusader armies, when united, could defeat the Turks in open battle. It gave them confidence, but it also came at a high cost. Many soldiers and animals were lost, and the long journey had only just begun. After Dorylaeum, the Crusaders continued east and then south toward Syria. The victories behind them did not bring comfort. Hunger, exhaustion, and fear followed them every step of the way. Their next challenge would be greater than anything they had faced before. Ahead of them stood the great city of Antioch.
Part 7. The March Toward Jerusalem. After the events at Antioch, the crusade entered a new phase. The great victory had saved the expedition, but it had also changed it. Many leaders and soldiers were exhausted, both physically and mentally. Some had already gained land and power. Others questioned whether continuing toward Jerusalem was still possible. For several months, the Crusaders remained in and around Antioch. They needed rest, food, and time to recover. But delay created frustration. Ordinary soldiers had joined the crusade with one clear goal in mind: Jerusalem. They did not understand politics or land claims. For them, Antioch was only a stop along the way. Eventually, in early 1099, the march resumed. The remaining Crusader army moved south along the eastern Mediterranean coast. This route was chosen carefully. Coastal cities allowed better access to supplies, often provided by local traders and fleets from Italian city-states. Even so, the journey was brutal. The army was smaller now, weakened by months of hunger, disease, and desertion. Many soldiers walked barefoot. Armor was damaged. Horses were few. Water remained a constant problem. As they passed through towns and countryside, the Crusaders sometimes negotiated peacefully for food. In other places, they used force. Discipline varied from group to group. There was no single command structure strong enough to control everyone at all times. Local Muslim rulers often avoided direct confrontation. They did not yet see the Crusaders as a united or permanent threat. Some cities paid the Crusaders to move on quickly. Others watched and waited. Throughout the march, religious belief remained central. Priests led prayers and processions. Soldiers believed that every step brought them closer to a holy goal. At the same time, violence had become normal. Years of war had hardened many of them. Mercy was limited. In June 1099, the Crusaders finally reached the hills surrounding Jerusalem. For many, this was the moment they had imagined since leaving Europe years earlier. They could see the city from a distance. Some cried, some prayed, others stood silently. But Jerusalem was well defended. The city was controlled by the Fatimid rulers of Egypt, not the Seljuk Turks. Its walls were strong, and supplies inside were secure. The Crusaders had reached their destination, but the hardest part was still ahead. They were tired, they were hungry, they were determined. The final siege was about to begin. In June 1099, the Crusader army arrived at the walls of Jerusalem. After nearly 4 years of travel, battles, and hunger, the city they had dreamed of for so long was finally in front of them. Its walls were tall and strong. Inside, the city was well supplied and defended. The Fatimid rulers had prepared carefully for the siege. The Crusaders began surrounding the city. They built wooden towers and catapults to reach the walls. Soldiers worked day and night. Hunger and disease were still present, and morale varied across the army. Leaders argued about strategy, while ordinary soldiers feared what was to come. For 6 weeks the siege continued. The defenders fought from the walls, throwing stones and boiling liquids. The attackers launched repeated assaults, but could not break through. Heat, thirst, and exhaustion affected both sides. Civilians inside Jerusalem also suffered. Many hid in their homes or in holy buildings, afraid of what the fighting might bring. Finally, on July 15, 1099, the Crusaders managed to breach the walls. Once the gates were open, chaos followed. Soldiers entered the city in a wave. They attacked not only the defenders but also civilians. Many men, women, and children were killed. The streets of Jerusalem ran with blood for days. Some were soldiers acting in fear and anger. Others followed orders from leaders. The result was the same: widespread death and destruction. For the Crusaders, this was called a holy victory. They believed that their faith had guided them and that they had fulfilled God's will. For the people of Jerusalem, it was a catastrophe. Families were destroyed, neighborhoods burned, and centuries-old communities shattered. No side in this event came out morally unscathed. After the siege, the Crusaders established control over Jerusalem and the surrounding region. They divided the land into small territories, later called Crusader states. Soldiers and nobles took positions of power. Some tried to protect civilians, while others claimed homes and property for themselves. The First Crusade had reached its goal, but at a terrible cost. Tens of thousands of people had died, including Crusaders, defenders, and civilians. Relationships among leaders were strained. Promises to allies, such as the Byzantine Empire, were often broken. Faith, ambition, and desperation had driven events at every stage. The capture of Jerusalem marked the end of the First Crusade's journey, but its consequences would last for generations. The Crusader states survived only for a short time, and the memory of violence shaped the region for centuries. This was the full story of the First Crusade. It was a story of faith, ambition, suffering, and human cost. No one side was completely right, and no side was entirely wrong. The truth lies in what actually happened.
Part 9. Aftermath and Consequences. After the capture of Jerusalem in 1099, the First Crusade officially ended. The Crusaders had achieved what they had set out to do. They reached the Holy City and established control over it. But the consequences of their journey were complex and far-reaching. The most immediate result was the creation of the Crusader states. Jerusalem, along with nearby territories, became the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Other areas like Edessa, Antioch, and Tripoli were also controlled by Crusader nobles. These states allowed the Europeans to maintain a presence in the region for decades. However, they were small islands of foreign power surrounded by stronger Muslim states. Their survival required constant warfare, negotiation, and alliances. The First Crusade also changed Europe. Nobles who went on the crusade gained wealth, land, and influence. Some kings and princes strengthened their authority at home by participating.
For ordinary soldiers and peasants, the journey left many dead and many others deeply scarred by hunger, disease, and violence. The crusade impacted local populations in the Middle East as well. Many Muslims and Jews were killed or displaced, cities were damaged, trade and agriculture were disrupted. These events left long-lasting bitterness and mistrust between different religious communities. Politically, the Crusaders' relationship with the Byzantine Empire was strained. Although Emperor Alexios had requested help, much of the land captured was not returned to him. This caused tension and weakened alliances between Western Europe and Byzantium. The Crusade had united people temporarily, but it also exposed divisions among leaders that would persist in later campaigns. Religious motivations were central to the Crusade, but the results showed that faith alone did not guarantee success or morality. Many soldiers acted out of ambition or survival rather than purely religious devotion. The idea of holy war spread across Europe, influencing future conflicts and shaping centuries of political and religious thinking. In the long term, the First Crusade set a precedent. It encouraged more crusades, more conflicts, and more interaction between Europe and the Middle East. It also left a complex legacy, stories of heroism and faith, alongside stories of violence, betrayal, and human suffering. The First Crusade was not a story of clear winners or losers. It was a human story, a story of belief, ambition, courage, and cost. Both Europeans and people of the Middle East were affected. Both faith and fear drove decisions, and both sides experienced the consequences of a movement that began with a call to defend religion and ended with bloodshed and political change. This concludes the full story of the First Crusade. It is remembered not as a simple victory or defeat, but as a complex chapter in history that shaped Europe, the Middle East, and the idea of holy war for generations to come. Part 10. Lessons and Historical Context. The First Crusade was over, but its story did not end in 1099. Its effects were felt for generations, shaping both Europe and the Middle East. Looking back, several lessons can be seen clearly. First, faith alone was not enough. Many people believed God would protect them, but without planning, training, and resources, even the most devoted crusaders failed. The People's Crusade had shown this painfully. Belief inspired courage, but courage alone could not ensure survival. Second, ambition and politics were always present. Leaders acted not only for religion, but also for power, land, and influence. The struggle between Bohemond, Raymond, and Godfrey at Antioch and beyond shows how human ambition shapes even holy campaigns. Third, the crusade had long-term consequences for civilians. Tens of thousands of people, Muslims, Jews, and Christians alike, died or were displaced. Cities were damaged, trade disrupted, and communities fractured. Violence left long-lasting bitterness and mistrust between different religious communities. Politically, the Crusaders' relationship with the Byzantine Empire was strained. Although Emperor Alexios had requested help, much of the land captured was not returned to him. This caused tension and weakened alliances between Western Europe and Byzantium. The crusade had united people temporarily, but it also exposed divisions among leaders that would persist in later campaigns. Religious motivations were central to the crusade, but the results showed that faith alone did not guarantee success or morality. Many soldiers acted out of ambition or survival rather than purely religious devotion. The idea of holy war spread across Europe, influencing future conflicts and shaping centuries of political and religious thinking. In the long term, the First Crusade set a precedent. It encouraged more crusades, more conflicts, and more interaction between Europe and the Middle East. It also left a complex legacy, stories of heroism and faith, alongside stories of violence, betrayal, and human suffering.
The First Crusade was not a story of clear winners or losers. It was a human story, a story of belief, ambition, courage, and cost. Both Europeans and people of the Middle East were affected. Both faith and fear drove decisions, and both sides experienced the consequences of a movement that began with a call to defend religion and ended with bloodshed and political change. This concludes the full story of the First Crusade. It is remembered not as a simple victory or defeat, but as a complex chapter in history that shaped Europe, the Middle East, and the idea of holy war for generations to come.
This video is part of our playlist, The Crusades, the Epic Saga, where we explore the fascinating history of the Crusaders from their earliest journeys to their eventual decline. In this series, you will discover the major battles, the key figures, and the profound impact the Crusades had on the world. If you found this first journey captivating, stay tuned for the next episode, where we will dive deeper into the Crusaders' later campaigns and the struggles that shaped their legacy. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any part of this historical saga. Join us and continue exploring how these events changed civilizations and left a lasting mark on history.